Good morning, ladies and coronavirus germs, and this is your ticker guy coming at you from the 23rd. Well, do you know why we're back to ladies and coronavirus germs? Because there's data that says that coronavirus ain't what everybody says it is. What, Denninger, what the hell are you talking about? And we'll get to that. And hey, we got the War Room, Jack Posobiec. Yes, he is the cheerleader, one of the many for MAGA, 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 MAGA. And by the way, did you watch the One America Network nut job chick that was in the back of the room that got to ask Trump a question the other day? I mean, I know Trump doesn't like the nut jobs from CNN, but the last time that I checked, there's not a whole lot of difference of when it comes to slanted questions and things like this. The question is never, is there a slant? The answer is always yes. The question is on which side. One of them the president always likes, and the other one the president always doesn't like. This is nothing new, folks. Does anybody remember Obama? For crying out loud. Give me a break. All right. I want to talk about data today. And we'll talk about politics some too. The politics are actually quite amusing. Mitch McConnell is trying to play TARP. And I actually think this is rather funny because we've got another vote on the Senate floor, another cloture attempt coming up here in about, it'll be up before the podcast goes live and gets processed. But as I'm recording it, the countdown clock is kind of on. And this is basically a grab fest of how much money we're going to blow out here and do whatever. All right. We'll see how that all works out. All right. Really. I mean, and really what we're talking about is, print, and then try to buy things with that. Well, the Fed and the Treasury cannot print coronavirus masks, cannot print cars, fire engines, police officers. I know. The last 10 years has said deficits don't matter. Government debt doesn't matter. There is no breaking point where there will be revulsion. There is no point where inflation will not spike to 15 or 20% a year and destroy everybody. It won't ever happen. It never will happen. It hasn't happened yet, and therefore it won't. Oh, boy. Oh, you could actually make the argument that this is worth it if, number one, the death rate was going to be truly hideous. Okay. Like the bubonic plague, for example, or Marburg, for God's sakes. But the data doesn't support that. That's the first thing. And then secondly, there's some very curious data in other countries, which it's a couple weeks behind, but not by much. And we'll get to that. There's a little problem here with some of the screaming that's going on. And yeah, I know some of the worst of what's going on in Italy and Spain right now is not in this data yet. But some of it was. So, yeah, a little bit of an issue there. We're going to get to that one. And then there's a disturbance in the high-frequency data that I watch that probably relates to people getting their head out of their ass with regards to these anti-malarials. And folks, I'll get to that too, because Fauci is a fraud. Fauci, if he is an actual scientist and not a political scold that happens to have a sheepskin and then is using that to leverage a political position of some kind, he'd know this. And for all those people that are saying, "Oh no," I've seen the excuses made. Hell, parts of the mainstream media said, "Look, if you took a dose of several grams of this stuff, it would kill you." Well, yes, it would. That's only something like 10 times the amount of the dose that you should take as a therapeutic. If you were to take a 10 times overdose of just about any drug, it would probably kill you. So I'm trying to figure out why that somehow is news, and yet this was what they ran the other day all over the mainstream media. Okay, God, Trump is such he is an irresponsible bastard. Well, actually, no. in this particular case, he's right. And my suspicion is that somebody, I don't think he's been listening to my podcast. Maybe he has. Maybe he's been reading my tickers. But we'll get to some data, some other data that supports this. Never mind the anecdotes, which are coming in. There's a guy out in Los Angeles that was literally given up for dead. And he essentially demanded the anti-malarial, the hydroxychloroquine, and he's alive, and he's okay, and his viral load has come way down. His fever's broken, his lungs are clearing, and he was literally choking to death. He had called his family in to say goodbye. They apparently were already on quarantine, so they couldn't expose him when they were already exposed. He was literally going to die. Yeah. Speaking of die, a very, very close friend of mine's grandfather passed the other day, and there is now some evidence that maybe this was COVID. All right? So, for those of you that say it doesn't kill old people, and there's some people out there saying, maybe it's not as dangerous. Well, listen, if you're old and frail, yes, it is. Okay? But he was into his 90s. He was old. He was frail. Serious comorbidities. Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. And if you're in that basket, folks, and you get this thing, it's bad news. Now, his wife, they're still married. Some of those people that still do it, is still married. His wife, who is in a similar state of medical distress, if you will. I mean, after all, she's old and frail too, right? She doesn't have it. At least not so far. She's not sick. And so you got to wonder, one of the things I've been talking about all the way through this thing is the silent attack rate. And folks, when you're an old married couple and all you got is each other, anyone that thinks that if you got something that's this contagious, you think you're not going to pass it from one of the, you're nuts. You're nuts. This is like people saying, well, I get sick and my wife doesn't get it. Well, maybe your wife, if you and your wife get sick, maybe, if as soon as you realize that you might be getting sick, the two of you either go live in different places or at least different sides of the house, and you're not contagious prior to doing that. The problem with coronavirus is that it doesn't work that way. You are contagious before that happens. All right? And let me point out that this nonsense about social contracts, there's no social contract. Our government broke it a long time ago and still is, and it's not going away. Okay? This is a rift that is not going to be healed anytime soon. I wish there was some way to heal this rift, but there is not. Cuomo is screaming about how everybody, we all have to make shared sacrifice. Well, what does Cuomo give up? An opera. What does everybody else give up? Their job, their house, their food, their everything. They'll be bankrupted. They'll be thrown out of business. And oh, by the way, if they're a small business, they're already done. Okay? If they're not, well, the rest isn't going. They're going to be done. And what did Cuomo give up? If there's a social contract and shared sacrifice, then everybody sacrifices equally in relative terms. In relative terms, folks. All right? Now think about that. All right? Give that some serious thought. Secondly, we have a wrong-headed model for 90% of this. A seriously wrong-headed model. And that model is we have to keep people out of the damned hospital. Why? Because the data out of Wuhan says that if you need a ventilator, if you need actual invasive treatment, and these are the only invasive treatment is the only thing that hospitals can actually do that you need a hospital for. All right? You don't need invasive treatment for a nasal cannula and free flow oxygen. You don't need an invasive, even for a demand valve, which is not generally used in medicine because they suck wearing one of those things all the time. It's like a scuba regulator, basically. I have one. I had one. Wait a minute. I sold that kit. It's part of my emergency oxygen kit for diving. I sold it when I stopped diving actively. But when I had a boat, I had a setup with medical setup and everything. I'd taken the training. I knew how to use it. And there it was, okay? And I had some stuff that was capable beyond my training. And I had it for a couple of reasons. One of them is that one of the guys that I used to dive with on a fairly regular basis was an actual EMT. So he did have the training. The second was that if it was my ass that was bent bad and thought that I would get somewhere by going beyond my formal training, it's my ass and I'm not going to sue myself. So therefore, I really didn't give a flying rat's fuck about, because in a situation like that, the bends is not a good way to go, ladies and germs, and I'll take a pass on it. If anything I can do to alleviate that until I can get my ass into a chamber, I'm going to do. But anyway, those interventions, those kinds of things, you can do in your own house. You can take pills in your own house. This virus does not have a characteristic where it severely dehydrates you and essentially destroys your ability to take in medications and sustenance, water in particular, by mouth. Okay? So there are diseases, by the way, where that's true. Okay? There are diseases that create really, really serious diarrhea, for example, which can be extraordinarily dangerous because not just from a dehydration standpoint, but from an electrolyte standpoint, can throw your electrolytes out of balance enough to the point that you have a heart attack. And so in that kind of situation, by God, we really do need hospitals that can treat that kind of thing because, listen, without an IV in your arm, there's nothing that can be done. But that is not true here. And it's just not the case. All right, so the problem is that what the Wuhan data says is that by the time you get to the point that you need truly interventionist measures, the kind that can only be done in a hospital, 95% of the time you die. And by the way, that's people go on vents, okay? Whether they be tube down the throat vents or positive pressure mask vents. Doesn't matter. Either way, 90% of the time you die, okay? And that's a shitty statistic. And we may be better at it than they are, but I bet we're not that much better. And before you say, oh, well, no, we'll save 7 out of 10. No, you won't. The data from long before this virus showed up is that you were slightly less than 50% likely to survive a vent from all causes to hospital discharge. So anybody that thinks that these things are some panacea and are going to make a huge difference in outcomes, you're just flat out wrong. All right, secondly, let's go to data. And this is the other problem. I got into it with people last night on Twitter again. The groupthink and the lack of the refusal to sit down at 5 minutes. You know, I can understand when it would actually take 10 or 15 with a calculator or by hand, a piece of paper and a pencil, and write out geometric series on a piece of paper to model what it is that you're advocating doing. All right. When you used to have to do it on a piece of paper and a pencil before there were calculators, it actually took a little while. The calculator doesn't take very long, and with Excel, it takes seconds. So there's really no argument that kind of, that we ought not be doing that kind of thing. All right. We absolutely should be doing that kind of thing. It should be a really big deal. So, and that's the problem. That's really where the problem is. And so, folks, look, take your geometric series. R0's 3, you start with one case, you work the series, and each new generation is the previous people who've been infected times that minus the percentage of the population, 330 million Americans, roughly, right? The percentage of the population that has been infected, because they can't be infected a second time, regardless of the outcome. Whether they die, if you die, you can't be infected again. But if you get it and recover, you can't be infected again because you have antibodies. So you run that series down, okay? And you will find that the coverage ratio, that is the immunity percentage, is very, very low right up until the end. All right, and this is the most important thing to understand. You have people saying, but herd immunity never works unless there's a vaccine. Well, it doesn't when you have things like this for the most part for a very specific reason. And that is that we make two assumptions. Number one, everybody, absolutely everybody goes on to get the disease, and they're clinically significant. All right, so essentially everybody that is exposed to chickenpox and gets the chickenpox is going to get a rash. You're going to get the fever. It's going to happen. Everybody that is exposed to and gets the measles is going to get the measles. Clinically, you're going to have the measles. This virus doesn't work that way. All of the virologists, all the epidemiologists, they all assume that this thing works like chickenpox and the measles. If you get the measles, you have the measles. But we knew that that was false when the Diamond Princess ship was out there, because after that was a tremendous experiment. I'm sure all the people that were on it were fantastic that we experimented on them. A very significant percentage of those people, and by the way, that was a very old and sick population, didn't generate very many deaths on a percentage basis. Not nearly what everybody was all worried about, first thing. Second thing is, a very significant percentage of the people that showed positive when they got off that boat never got sick. Never. They did their 14-day quarantines, and there you go. Okay? Now, we've just had, Rand Paul just tested positive. We had a bunch of people in the NBA that tested positive. Did they get symptoms? Well, so far, Rand Paul hasn't. It'll be very interesting to see if Rand Paul ever gets symptoms. It's going to be very interesting, all these other people. Did they ever get any symptoms? Are they symptomatic, all right? We had apparently somebody in Control Tower was symptomatic. So then, of course, they're like, well, shit, we got to test everybody else who was in there. And, because they've probably been exposed, right? And so they got 4 people that pop up positive in that control tower. They close the control tower for a while while they go through and they decontaminate everything in there. Those are 4 people that tested positive, but none of them at this point have symptoms. Now, are they going to get symptoms? Well, I don't know if they're going to get, but a significant percentage of the people will not. And we have mathematical models that strongly suggest that the asymptomatic percentage, we don't know what it is at this point. This is important information. We don't know what it is. There are estimates, scientific paper estimates, all the way out to 90 to 95%. I think that number may actually be low. The extrapolation of the confidence level on the Diamond Princess was somewhere between 20 and 40. And that's a huge range, folks. And that's, that's the problem with these things, is that your confidence intervals with the data that we have at this point is very wide. Okay, wide confidence intervals when you're talking about science are not good. You want narrow confidence intervals. These are very wide confidence intervals. And the reason that they're wide confidence intervals is we just don't have the information. So we're being asked to do all sorts of extraordinary things based upon data that is crap. And that's a problem. All right, now secondly, we do have, however, some hard data out of Italy in particular. In Italy, if you die in Italy of this virus, only 0.5% of the people who have died in Italy of this virus had no contraindications. In other words, no comorbidities. Everybody else, and the average age of people who had died in Italy is like 81. Okay? Well, would you go look up the life expectancy chart? What was your life expectancy? The average person who died in Italy is beyond the average life expectancy of a human being. Okay, that's not surprising. I have a very good friend of mine. His grandfather died. They think it was from this. All right, they're not sure yet because the test isn't back, but he's still dead. All right. And then we have the other aspect of it, which is that the Italy flu surveillance data and excess mortality, which the European Union tracks for all the EU countries, showed much bigger spikes in a couple of recent years than what we've got in the data so far from what's going on over there now. Now, that data is a couple of weeks behind. Not a lot behind, but a couple weeks. So I looked at where their last recorded data point is. But what this says is that it's not at all uncommon during flu season for Italy to have huge spikes of old people die. Huge spikes. Well, okay. Yeah. So how many people are being tallied up as a coronavirus death that would have happened anyway in a bad flu year? Well, I don't know. But again, we don't know. Folks, the basic problem here is this. Healthcare is a parasitic job. It's a parasitic part of the economy. All right. I don't care whether you like this. I know I'm going to get called names for this. You're probably going to get 20 downvotes for that one sentence alone. I don't care if you give me a downvote for it. It's the truth. If you don't want to hear the truth, then you really should unsubscribe from my podcast, and you should never listen to one again, because I'm not going to lie to you just because it happens to be politically correct. We did that back in the 1980s with AIDS, and we killed 450,000 Americans. And by the way, Senator Feinstein was rewarded. She was the mayor of San Francisco at the time. She was the one who could have ordered the bathhouses closed and didn't do it. And in fact, she didn't do it for a year after it had been conclusively traced on an epidemiological basis that was where the spread was coming from. That was what was slaying gay American men. And yet the left loves Democrats. By God. You love people that what percentage of the gay American men was 450,000 dead? Yeah, not all the people who died were gay in America, gay men, but an awful lot of them were. And he also killed virtually all the hemophiliacs. What the hell did they do to deserve that? But you know, political correctness will nail you. And now what we're saying is, well, we need to lock down the economy because we have to bend the curve and flatten it out. Well, folks, again, run the mathematics, okay? Run your exponential series. Get to where we are now with positive tests. Transfer that starting point into another series, exponential series, and suppress R naught down to whatever it is that you think you can accomplish. I think you might be able to get it to 1.2, assuming that it really is 3.0 and all this. Make all those assumptions, and then run that out for however long you think the economy can stand that without collapsing. And then when you're done, you're going to have to unlock things, right? So transfer it back into that first series and see what happens. All right? Just do that. And what you're going to find is that this suppression thing isn't going to work. Now you have people say, well, we could do what Singapore and South Korea did. Yeah, Singapore and South Korea have a surveillance society that allows them to do retrospective searches for where people were, so they can do integration of that with somebody who's positive and try to figure out who the hell to go have tested. And they also have the kind of intrusive thing where your phone battery goes dead and 20 minutes later there's cops banging on your door because your actual location and compliance with quarantine isn't being is not being enforced. They can't tell whether or not you are or not anymore. And so by God, they send the police. Not only do we not have that sort of infrastructure in this country, even if we wanted to pass a law and said it had to happen, that people had to do this, there isn't the infrastructure doesn't exist. Never mind that I suspect that you'd get an awful lot of people to shoot over that, maybe including me. We don't live in a country where those kinds of things can be done. It can't work here. So, lock your economy down, take the GDP hit, go out for whatever series, however long you think you can tolerate it, then release it and tell me what happens. The very same thing that was going to happen anyway. Well, we can maintain this until you can get a vaccine and get people in. No, you can't. First off, there has never been a successful human coronavirus vaccine. Never. We have SARS, we have MERS. By the way, I think that's why this virus is out in the wild. Because my suspicion is that's what the Chinese were working on at their Wuhan lab. I think they were working on a SARS vaccine. This is also why we have a virus in the wild that has a silent attack rate. And which is something that, by the way, typically doesn't happen. You talk to an epidemiologist or a virologist, they're going to tell you this just, for all intents and purposes, it just doesn't. We don't have epidemics caused by viruses that in 80, 95% of the people, even half the people, produce no symptoms or such mild symptoms that you can't identify them as being potentially caused by some unique viral agent. Really? When has that ever occurred? I mean, what? So in a huge percentage of the people, this thing produces a very mild head cold that you're sniffly a little bit. But in some percentage of the people, it kills them. Yeah. Do I think it was a bioweapon? No. That's loony bin stuff. But is it crazy that these guys would have been working on something like that? No, because SARS really was a no bullshit threat. And it had a much higher casualty rate too. And folks, figuring this stuff out, I mean, it's not stupid for somebody to try to figure it out, because you could get something like Marburg that comes out at some point. And you want to talk about something that's really scary? Now, there's a virus that even with the best medical interventions that we have, which is basically none for a virus, okay, that actually are effective most of the time, even with something like Marburg and the best medical interventions, that thing managed to get loose, and it killed 30% of the people that it got. And the only reason that it didn't get out into the wild was that everybody freaked out instantly, and they were able to actually lock down everyone that had it. And so the deaths just happened to the people that had it. We are way beyond that point, folks. This thing is everywhere in the world right now. Everywhere. All right, and everybody's looking for political blame. Reuters just has a headline up: exclusive, U.S. axed CDC expert job in China months before the virus outbreak. Was that really true? I don't know. You know what? There's so much bullshit. What was really going on there? Oh, by the way, why aren't we talking about the CDC sitting on the known potential effectiveness of an anti-malarial since 2005? 15 years. Who was president then? Was President Trump president 15 years ago? Incidentally, for those of you that say that this thing has absolutely no evidence and no proof that it works, would you take a look at the contact and the transfer rates of this virus in countries that have high amounts of malaria? Well, you haven't done that? Why not? Wouldn't that be some very interesting evidence if, in fact, people who are walking around all the time with this stuff in their body, and you can't seem to get coronavirus, this novel coronavirus doesn't seem to be infecting people like crazy over there. The transmission rate is much lower. Why? I wonder why. Well, guess what? What if, and of course, high malarial nations also tend to be ones that are kind of hot, right? But wait, we were told that summer won't save us. Well, which is it? Was it the drug, or was it the summer? Does it really matter? Because what season are we in right now? Yeah. So look, folks, the only healthcare is parasitical, which means that you have to have a strong economy in order to support a strong healthcare system. If you destroy the economy, we end up with a negative 50% GDP, which is what we're going to do if we keep this up for any length of time at all. In fact, we're probably at neg 20 right now. Okay, we literally have in many individual states 20,000 people a day filing for unemployment. We're going to have a 20% unemployment rate in the United States, or better. We're going to have an economic depression far worse than the 1930s. It's going to happen. All right, and then if that's not enough, we're going to have we're going to have all these things going on. It's going to be lovely, right? Well, actually, no, it's not going to be lovely, because we're going to do these suppression, we're going to do the social distancing, we're going to do all this stuff, and the economy is going to collapse. And then with what money are you going to pay to run the hospital? Think about it, folks. With what money will you pay to run a hospital? No tax receipts, no income. Everybody is broke. The commercial property values and therefore commercial property tax receipts go to zero. The cross defaults and bankruptcies, all the CDOs and CLOs that were put out in commercial real estate, every one of those right now, as it stands with what we're doing, is going to be a zero all the way up to the AAAs, the AAA tranches. All the rest of them are zeros. And guess what? You know what? You want to know who owns things in those stacks? Pension funds. Public pensions. Not only are Folks, where in the hell is the cash flow going to come from to run the hospitals and the public health systems and everything else? Where is it going to come from? The Federal Reserve cannot actually print cash flow. The Federal Reserve and the Treasury can print money, but they can't print masks. They can't print doctors. They can't print nurses. They can't print cops. They can't print fire engines. And they can't print drugs. And if you devalue the currency by doing this sort of thing, which is, by God, what they're going to do, if you start talking about running this thing out 6 months, you are going to put $6 trillion into the national debt. And you're going to zero tax receipts. There's going to be essentially no sales tax collected in most states. Most states don't tax food sales. If the only thing I can buy, because I'm locked down in my house, is go to the grocery store, I am going to pay zero sales tax. Where do you think most states' revenue comes from? And then, what are you going to, by God, we're going to bankrupt most businesses, not just little ones, but any corporate thing that's out there. All those CLOs and CDOs and all the places that are supposed to be paying rent, they're not paying rent. Well, one person's rent's another person's cash flow. And boy, oh boy, those property tax bills are still out there. They're not going to get paid because there's no cash. There's no cash flow. So we're going to suppress this thing. Yeah, we're great. We're going to do this for 6 months or 12 months or 18 months. And then you're going to expect the hospital to be there. With what money? Is this before or after you have to lay off half the cops or all the cops? Is this before or after you don't have the, I mean, now look, are municipalities and stuff going to prioritize things like, keeping the water plant running? Yeah. But again, folks, we're back to one person's paycheck ends up getting spent somewhere else. One person's rent that's foregone is another person's paycheck. It is another person's cash flow. One person's non-economic activity is another person that doesn't get paid. And all of this generates taxes, which directly and indirectly supports the establishment and the production of public health. Destroy that, and we have no first world medical system. That's it. It's that simple. You can't do this. So what can you do? Well, we know that for this virus, 0.5% of persons who died in Italy are healthy. All right. So if you're young and healthy, and remember, you can be young and sick. All right. You can be young and have serious comorbidities. There are people who are young and, for example, have survived cancer. I dated a woman a very long time ago who had a daughter who had leukemia. It's terrible. I had a nephew that died of leukemia. All right. So, I mean, just because you're young doesn't mean you're healthy. But for those people that are young and healthy, and actually just healthy, because the Italian data doesn't break out age necessarily. It does in the mortality numbers. But the other thing is that of those people who are healthy, only 0.5% of those people who have died in Italy were healthy. So as of the data yesterday that I saw, that means out of all that horrific death toll over there, something, I think the number's like 20 that have died that were healthy. All right, so, I mean, are there exceptions? Of course there's exceptions. Listen, the news is trumpeting the one young girl who's on a vent in an ICU, and she has coronavirus. And are there going to be those cases? Absolutely there's going to be those cases. But the key is, what you're not finding is thousands of them. And what they're doing is using that to try to scare you, which is what they do all the damn time. So look, here's the thing. We can't shut the economy down, but what we can do is we can tell older, not healthy people, either in combination or together, you must self-isolate. And the reason you must self-isolate is if you don't, and you get this illness, and it's a bad case, Now that's three ands, okay? If you don't, if you get the virus, if you have a bad case, there aren't going to be enough hospital beds. And you're going to be the one that gets turned away because you personally decided that self-isolating, and if you can use it, prophylaxis, okay, which may or may not work, we don't know, but you personally decided not to do those things. That is a personal decision. It's, in our opinion, a foolish decision, but it's a personal decision. And if it happens, and the hospital system is overloaded because we just don't have the ability to deal with everybody at that time, you're going to get denied. We'll give you whatever drugs we can. We'll give you whatever supporting things you can take home with you to your house, but you're not getting a bed. Does that sound terrible? Well, to a lot of people it does. But you know what? For years, you told my daughter, who was 20 years old, from the time that she was legally an adult and could contract and get her own apartment and buy her own car, and that she couldn't have a drink. She could not have a drink because she was too young. She couldn't have a drink even if there was a blow machine in the bar, and in order to get the next one, she had to blow under .08. In other words, even if there was a machine that the bartender was by law, by regulation, forced to cut her off before she could become intoxicated, all right, she still couldn't have a drink, even though she was an adult, just because she's too young. We tell men when they're 18, they told me, you got to register for the draft. You have to do it on your 18th birthday just because you're young. Because you are a young swinging dick, and if this country needs you to go shoot some bad guy that we tell you to shoot, whether you think it's a bad guy or not, you must register for the draft. And by God, if there's a draft, you must go. Because you are young. We do this all the damn time. So why is it that all of a sudden we can't tell old people, you must self-isolate? But we're not going to enforce it at gunpoint. They will enforce draft dodging at gunpoint. They will enforce you wanting a drink when you're not 21 at gunpoint. The cop will haul your ass out of the car and throw you in prison. You're going to go to jail, buddy. Even though you're not intoxicated, it doesn't matter. The legal limit, if you're under 21, is 0.00. You have any alcohol in your system, that is a DUI. But you're not intoxicated, legally or otherwise. Doesn't make any difference. You had a drink, you're driving, bang, you're going to jail. That's it. Just because you're not 21 years old. I turned 18, I had to go down to the post office, I had to file selective service registration. Because I was 18. Because I was a strong, young, swinging dick. I wasn't that strong. I was young and I had a dick. And that was enough. And therefore, I was obligated under the law, because of my age and my status, to do something that the 50-year-old guy was not. Think about this, folks. Think about this. And yet, there's something wrong in the time of a pandemic that selectively harms old, frail people, either together or in combination. Sorry about that. Backwards. Either together or separately, whether you're old or frail. And there's something wrong with our government telling those people, you should stay indoors away from everybody else. And you should consult with a physician, and if you can, use prophylaxis. So if you get the virus anyway, you got a better chance of not overloading the healthcare system. And by God, if you don't do those things and you get seriously sick, and as a result of you having this much higher risk, you overload the healthcare system, you're not going to get a bed. And that's how we handle this. And everybody else goes back to work. We don't destroy the economy. We don't need to print up $1 trillion. We don't have Nancy Pelosi and the people on the right with their grab bag. Nancy Pelosi wants a grab bag for certain people. Mitch McConnell wants a grab bag for certain other people. Mitch McConnell thinks that all these airlines that boy, they borrowed up money and they spent all their cash flow and they bought back stock. Why, they should get as much as they bought back and gave it to their executives, and the government should give them the $50 billion that they did this. You think about that, folks. Just think about that. Think about how stupid that is. Meantime, we got every retailer across the land all closed. Social distancing. It's not just social distancing. It's not. Yeah, that's what we're told. You know what, in Florida? They closed bars and they closed restaurants. You know what happened? Everything else closed. Why? Because there's no customers. You scared the living shit out of everybody. Even the people who aren't old and sick. Because by God, you're going to give it to Granny and she's going to die. But it's not Granny's responsibility to isolate herself. It's my responsibility as an 18-year-old male to go register for selective service. It's my daughter's responsibility until she turned 21 not to try to drink in a bar because they'll arrest her. And folks, we're not just going to say that if you do it anyway and you have a bad outcome, we're going to hold you responsible for manslaughter or whatever. No. We do that with the people that are ordinary adults. Okay? By the way, now you're not 21, you can't buy cigarettes. But if you're 21 in 1 minute, you can buy all cigarettes you want. But if you're not 21, you can't buy cigarettes. You're an adult. You're legally an adult. But just by virtue of your age, by virtue of your magical special status, we are going to use the guns of government. We will actually arrest people for possession and sale of tobacco to somebody who isn't of the right bracket in age. But we can't do this when it comes to coronavirus, with an actual infectious agent. We cannot advise old and ill people, don't leave your house. Don't live with somebody who is young and doesn't have special risk. And if you do I'm sorry, that means that one of you's got to go, or two of you's got to go, or whatever, okay? And if you can't do it, you just legitimately can't do it, well, then, you can take some prophylaxis. But if something goes wrong, folks, then, if there's plenty of room in the hospital, okay, we'll try to take care of you. But what if there's not? Think about this. What if there's not? Because you showed up on the wrong day, there's an overload. You don't get the bed because you made the decision. You weren't going to distance yourself from others. You weren't going to take the protective actions. You personally made the choice. We're not going to use a gun to force you to do it like we do with selective service, with alcohol, tobacco, and dozens of other things. We're not going to use a gun. But we are going to tell you that you're responsible for the consequences. We're going to reopen the economy, and everybody else is going to go back to work. And this way, not only will you have a strong incentive to do the right thing, if you're one of those people, if you don't, there's a better chance you're going to get treated. Because if we destroy the economy, there won't be a healthcare system. And you know what? If you're old or sick, you're eventually going to need that healthcare. Eventually. And would you like it to be in a strong healthcare system that is backed by a strong economy, or would you like it to be a hospital that has closed doors and is shuttered because there are no supplies, there are no people, there's no money, and there's no ability to pay for anything? And if you don't think that's what's going to happen if we keep going down this road, yes, it is. I'm your ticker guy. And that's reality.